I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered these famous words in 1963. He went on to say that one day his dream was to have sons of former slaves and slave owners sit together at the table of brotherhood. But after nearly 200 years of conflict between the races in our country, especially in the South, how could that ever happen?
Ain't gonna let nobody, Lordy, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody, Lordy, turn me round. Keep on a-walking, Lordy, keep on a-talking, Lordy.
This is the story of a 1971 Supreme Court decision that declared busing was an acceptable method to end school segregation. But more than just a documentary about the law, it's a story about a town that chose to do the right thing even when that was not expedient. It tells of over 2 decades of conflicts in the streets, at school board meetings, in the regional courts, and even behind the scenes at the highest court in the land. And everywhere there was conflict, you would find people working to compromise, determined to find a solution that would heal the wounds that divided their community, and hopefully bringing them a little closer to Dr. King's dream.
Oh yea, oh yea, oh yea. All persons having business before the Honorable, the Supreme Court of the United States.
On May 17, 1954, the Warren Court rejected segregation in its Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka ruling. While the first Brown decision made segregation unconstitutional, the justices provided no remedy for the plaintiffs. A year later, in its Brown 2 decision, the court gave the job of ending segregation back to the district courts. No time frame was given, but the decision instructed that action be taken with all deliberate speed. Separate but equal was now not only unconstitutional, it had been proven that but equal was an impossibility. Elizabeth Randolph was a Charlotte teacher and administrator from the 1950s through the 70s.
Those were the days of complete segregation, and all of the schools where I taught were schools for black students only. The educational, instructional materials were not sufficient. In each one of those towns, the black schools got the textbooks that the white schools had used, and they got the new books coming from Raleigh. And I did not expect to see it in Charlotte, but I did.
By September of 1957, Charlotte was ready for its first attempt at desegregation. Dorothy Counts was one of 2 black students selected to attend an all-white high school. On her first day at Harding High School, Dorothy made her way through an angry crowd. Even though she was verbally and physically abused that day, she maintained her composure. However, over the next several days, the conflict increased until she was hit from behind while standing at her locker.
It just felt like a sharp object. I didn't see anything, I just know that something hit me in the back of my head. And that was the first time that I really felt fear.
One event that would eventually facilitate the successful integration of the Charlotte schools occurred in 1960. Once again, Elizabeth Randolph.
In the 1960s, there were 2, well, I guess you can say there were 4 school systems. The city schools had a black and white school system, and the county schools had a black and white school system. In the 1960s, the county schools and the city schools merged.
In 1963, Dexter Feaster attended 3rd grade at a segregated Charlotte elementary school.
We didn't know any better. It's what we had grown accustomed to because it was all that we knew.
In 1964, with the help of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, Julius Chambers opened an office in Charlotte. Early that fall, he was approached by Darius and Vera Swann, missionaries that had recently returned on leave with their children from an assignment in India. Their son had been assigned to a segregated school.
Color was simply not something which they saw. I never had a chance to grow up that way, and we thought that this was something worth preserving. And we believed at that point that this country had moved far enough along its way for them to grow up without this consciousness of any difference. Of course, we were somewhat naive.
On January 19, 1965, Chambers filed the Swann case, but the conflict was just beginning. Shortly after midnight on November 22nd, the houses of Julius Chambers and 3 other civil rights leaders were bombed. The first explosion was at the house of the head of Charlotte's NAACP, Kelly Alexander.
I don't have any knowledge of knowing why this was done or who did it, but I do know it was an organized attempt at our lives. the continuation of the struggle for freedom in the state of North Carolina, in my community, will be intensified.
By this time, the Supreme Court had become impatient with the pace of the desegregation effort. In 1964, the court declared in Griffin, "There has been entirely too much deliberation and not enough speed." In 1968, the court declared that school boards had an affirmative duty to ensure racial discrimination would be eliminated root and branch. At the first hearing for Swann, the district court sided with the school board. By the time the plaintiffs filed a motion for further relief in September 1968, a new judge, James McMillan, was on the bench. The facts were hard to dispute. Approximately 71% of the 84,000 students in the 107 schools were white. 29% were black. 2/3 of the black students attended segregated schools. The judge requested a plan from the school board. However, over the next year, the board, under the leadership of Chairman William Poe, voted with a consistent 5-4 majority to decline the judge's invitation. Finally, in December 1969, when McMillan ordered busing to end segregation, and the appeals court overturned a portion of his ruling, the stage was set for the case to be heard by the Supreme Court. However, not everyone in Charlotte was prepared to wait quietly for the court to act.
Those of you and throughout the county, through intelligent decision, so decide that you will refrain from sending your children to school under a tyrannical plan, the Concerned Parents Association will afford legal counsel for each and every one.
At the Supreme Court, a new Chief Justice had recently been appointed, and it was apparent to the other justices that Warren Burger had his own agenda. On October 12, 1970, the Burger Court heard oral arguments in Swann, and the following Saturday the justices had their first conference to discuss the case. Chief Justice Burger failed to follow protocol and assigned the all-important task of drafting an opinion to himself. The first draft didn't represent the majority opinions that had been expressed at conference, and it took 6 months of behind-the-scenes wrangling and 6 revisions to arrive at a consensus. On April 20th, 1971, shortly after 10 a.m., the Chief Justice announced, "I have for announcement the judgment of the court in number 281.
The U.S. Supreme Court today upheld a pupil assignment plan for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, originally ordered into effect last fall by District Judge James McMillan."
Back in Charlotte, the tensions had grown worse. School board meetings were regularly invaded by angry crowds of parents protesting the tyranny of the federal courts. But in spite of the stubbornness of the board's majority, the school superintendent, William Self, was looking for a compromise. When he was joined by an optimistic chairwoman, Maggie Ray, and a newly formed Citizens Advisory Board, a resolution to the conflict seemed possible. Racial incidents, however, were still happening in the schools. As Dexter Feaster, by this time a junior at Independence High, recalls,
And when the tension was high like that, it really didn't take much.
And suddenly something broke loose as the kids were leaving the gymnasium. What broke loose? Pushing, fighting, shoving. Several kids were taken to the hospital.
but the positive spirit of the newly formed alliance between the Citizens Advisory Board and the school administration would eventually win out. On July 9, 1975, Judge McMillan ordered the Swann file closed. What can be learned from this story? One important lesson about conflict and compromise is to remember that perseverance and a positive spirit will often prevail even when the odds are against you. Another possible lesson is to plan your confrontations. As Maggie Ray remembers, Southerners are always more civil over dinner. But there's another, even more important lesson to be learned. After all of the conflicts had been resolved, the positive benefits of bringing the races together overflowed to schools and spread throughout the community. Dr. King's dream, it turns out, was good for Charlotte politically and economically as well. In 1996, a parent who had not experienced the battles and benefits of Charlotte's desegregation effort sued the district, and a new judge ordered an end to busing. The final lesson from Charlotte's experience thus far is that a lasting solution will demand persistent determination. History has shown that Charlotte is up to the challenge.